I'm with Dr. Heather Evans, a licensed clinical social worker who has a practice in Coopersburg. And Heather, we have been talking together about the feelings people have during this time, the tension, the anxiety, the fears. And one word I know you have used with this is trauma. Where we think of physical, terrible things that happen to the body, but even if it's an anxiety and fear sort of situation, trauma is a good word for it, I guess.
Absolutely. It's trauma, and it's something we could call collective trauma, meaning we are all experiencing it together. So trauma is when there is an event that involves a threat, and the response to that threat is a loss of power and helplessness, fear, and a disruption to our relationships and our belief system. That's absolutely what we're experiencing right now. Trauma also can happen when we're bearing witness to somebody else who's being threatened. Right now, we have threat that is perhaps for many of us invisible, but we see signs all around us that there is a threat taking place. And some of us have already experienced this threat on a much more personal level. And again, we're experiencing it collectively. This is something that trauma brings loss. Trauma is something that we have so many losses that we're grieving right now, so many things that have been disrupted, so many unknowns, so much uncertainty. Trauma exposes our vulnerability, which we are vulnerable as human beings. That's just a part of being human, but it's not something that we are always comfortable with. And this has certainly exposed our vulnerability because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how long this is going to take. And frankly, it has disrupted our life in such a way that we will always look back before the coronavirus pandemic and after. We don't know what the after is yet going to look like.
Right. So with trauma, loss of job, loss of events, weddings and things, loss of people, things like that, what are a couple of things we can keep in mind to do so we can deal with the trauma and deal with being cooped up 24/7, perhaps sometimes with people we aren't necessarily cooped up with?
Absolutely. One way to look at it is that the healing or the coping of trauma should always be the opposite of the trauma experience. So number one, I mentioned that trauma is experiencing powerlessness and helplessness. So we can find things that are within our power. We can choose to move our bodies. We can choose what to think and how we think about it. We can choose gratitude, which is great medicine. We may not be able to manage what's going externally, but we can manage what's happening in our home and work environment. Those people you talked about being cooped up with, we can have conversations that talk about what we need, what we expect, how do we share work, school, living space in a way that works for everyone? How do we still find ways to protect each other's privacy? It will require a lot of communication and a lot of working together. So if trauma also impacts by experiencing helplessness, we can do things that will give us a sense of empowerment and productivity. This is a time we can think about, what are the things I always wanted to do when I said I was too busy? What can I learn? What project can I embark on? Some of us aren't yet at that place where we can think about that, but I know I've heard people who are creating bucket lists as a family for activities and things that they will do. So trauma is disruptive and unpredictable. We can also do things to make life predictable. We can create a structure or a schedule for our day. Perhaps even if we're working from home, we can wake up every day at the same time, take a shower, get dressed as if we are going to work, do things that give us a sense of rhythm, that create a predictability in the midst of so much unpredictability. The last and most important thing I will say is that since trauma always isolates, and this has been so isolating, we are social distancing right now, we have to be extremely creative about ways that we can connect with each other. We have to do things to reach out when we ourselves are feeling like isolating and are depressed, and we have to do things to reach out to those that we know may be alone. That is one of the most healing ingredients of trauma. If we look at the history of what heals trauma, it's connection, it's relationship. So we have a responsibility to each other, and how are we interacting with each other in ways that are actually bridging that gap of the distance that's caused right now by this pandemic.
All right. One last question really quick, and I don't have a lot of time. So if people are actually depressed or believe they are, It's great to talk with all the cooped up family members with us, but they ought to be also making a call to a counselor to take care of that, right?
Absolutely. There are so many resources, even in the Lehigh Valley. Many therapists have moved to online resources through video and phone calls. And so there are a lot of resources right here in the Lehigh Valley, and we always encourage someone to reach out. You can reach out here. They can reach out in other places around the valley to get the support that they need during this time.
Dr. Heather Evans, thank you so much for joining us.